Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, it's April 7th of 2025. Today is day 549. Greetings from Cairo. I'm in Egypt. Much of what's happened in the United States today, I'll have to give you updates about tomorrow, including a significant readout of the meeting that did happen between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the White House. So I'll give you an update about that in tomorrow's daily check-in. Egypt, I can give you updates about what's happening here. Egypt's playing such a critical role in terms of what's happening in Gaza. They really are positioned, and I believe this to be true, to be the most significant country in the region to be able to respond to the most significant amounts of reconstruction needed once all of the bombing and the war and the atrocities in Gaza are brought to an end. Remember, Egypt also plays such a significant role because Egypt and Jordan are the two countries in the region that still continue to have a peace agreement with Israel. And Egypt is surrounded by other countries that have significant unrest. So civil war in Libya. Many would say that Egypt, in terms of Northern Africa, is one of the most stable countries around. You have Sudan in the south. Compared to what's happening along its borders, let alone Gaza specifically, along the border in the Sinai and the Philadelphia corridor. So one of the things we've heard the most profoundly here, particularly from government officials in Egypt, is that Palestinians in Gaza will not be displaced. This is a red line issue for the Arab world, particularly for Egyptians and Jordanians, but specifically government officials we've met with here and people on the street. It's a non-starter. Millions of Egyptians took to the streets in Eid Fitr, after Ramadan to show solidarity with the Palestinian people of Gaza, saying that they would not be displaced, that they would not support a forcible transfer of Palestinians out of Gaza. So the problem is that the ongoing bombing, the ongoing atrocities, the pressures that are put on because of the siege on Gaza, it's making the people of Gaza, the reality for life there, unlivable. And pressures come from Hamas. We've seen protests in the streets of Gaza as well. So pressures by both Hamas and the Israeli government are creating conditions that make it increasingly impossible for the people of Gaza to live there and have any type of life. Personally, I thought one of the most profound statements I've heard in terms of the global movement advocating for an end to the war on Gaza has been "Let Gaza live." And since we've been in Egypt last night, we met with the foreign minister here who talked to us about the Egypt plan. So he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Immigration, and Egyptian expatriates. His name is Badr Abdel-Lati. He stressed Egypt's total rejection of Israeli aggression on the Strip and the occupied West Bank, as well as Israel's brutal use of military force without any regard for the principles of international humanitarian law. He's Egypt's top diplomat, and he stated Israel's practices fuel the feelings of hatred and hostility in the Middle East, contradicting the foundations of peaceful coexistence called for by all divine religions. He warned that the failure to stop Israeli violations and provocations could lead to widespread waves of anger that threaten to have serious repercussions on international peace and security. So not just peace and security in the region, but peace and security in the whole world. And so we, of course, talked about our priorities at Churches for Middle East Peace of calling for a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire. We did express our appreciation for the role that Egypt's played in the negotiations around hostages and a ceasefire agreement, in addition to the role that they've played in terms of regional peace, security, and stability, affirming Egypt's outright rejection of Israel's violations against the Palestinian people. And we're in agreement that we completely oppose any forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. And we also affirmed Egypt's sincere efforts to de-escalate the situation and stop the war. In addition to our political meetings, we've been meeting with Islamic leaders and Christian leaders here in Egypt, seeking to stand in solidarity alongside of other religions and Christian brothers and sisters, to call for a ceasefire, an end to all war and all violence, the laying down of weapons and arms as we work together in solidarity in pursuit of peace. So that's an update in terms of some of the things that have been happening here. An update in terms of the political front. Israel struck tents outside of 2 major hospitals in Gaza overnight into today. At least 2 people were killed in those attacks. 9 other people were wounded, including 6 reporters, according to medics in Gaza. Hamas said it fired a barrage of rockets at South Israel cities in response to Israeli massacres of civilians in Gaza. As the territory's health ministry said, Israeli strikes killed at least 39 people over the last 24 hours. One person, I actually read that there were Reuters reported 1 person was injured, but in Israeli news, I read that several people had minor injuries. I read that there were about 10 different rockets that were, entering into Israeli territory, the vast majority which were knocked out by the Iron Dome system, but some shrapnel and things did break through. The Israeli military this weekend on Saturday backtracked on its account of the circumstances of the killing of 15 Palestinian medics by Israeli forces last month. That was after that video that I talked about emerged online. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said the footage matches the sequence of events described by witnesses. They found the video on the phone of one of the staffers who had been killed. Israel now controls about 50% of the Gaza Strip, with the largest contiguous area of control located around the border of Gaza. The border being not only the Philadelphia corridor in the south in terms of Egypt, but the Gaza enclave in terms of the borders with Israel. Israel systematically destroyed Palestinian homes, farmland, and infrastructure in certain areas of Gaza to the point of I can't say that word. It's uninhabitable, according to troops' testimonies in an Israeli watchdog group's report that was just published today. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is deteriorating so dangerously. It's now officially a month since aid has been cut off from the territory. Hunger is spreading. Clean water is being significantly and increasingly restricted throughout the whole enclave, according to NGOs and the UN. The Trump administration last month moved forward with the sale of 20,000 U.S.-made assault rifles to Israel. I talked about this last week as well, that the former Biden administration delayed over concerns that they would get into the hands of militant settlers and extremist settlers. These were some of the same settlers that had been sanctioned. The Trump administration undid those sanctions when Trump came back into office. And, I wanted to just mention, why is Netanyahu visiting the White House today? Some of the thoughts about that are, of course, that Trump would give a benediction on the Israeli offensive in Gaza. But remember that Netanyahu also is trying to persuade Trump to roll back the 27% U.S. tariff on imports from Israel. So Israel's economy has been in bad shape. The tariffs have discouraged U.S. investment in Israel for producing goods for the U.S. market. Netanyahu thought that Israel rolling back its tariff to 0 on imports from the U.S., which Israel did just in the last week, would keep Israel from being hit. But Trump's policymaking is pretty compartmentalized. So Israel was, received tariffs, or tariffs were put on Israeli goods just the way they were on other countries. And Hegseth also, Netanyahu did not like that Hegseth was outing Israeli intel capabilities on Yemen earlier also. And there was a question about what's going to happen with Iran also. So I'll give a readout on that tomorrow. Trump is set to go to Saudi Arabia as his first foreign visit. And in Israel, an opposition member of the Knesset claimed that the Gaza ambulance incident happened as a result of government rhetoric about the fact that there are no innocent people in Gaza. So a member of the Knesset named Gilad Kariv in Israel claimed that recent deadly shooting of the ambulance convoy he called it an attempt to cover up the incident, are the result of a culture that's been created by senior members of the Israeli government and their supporters who are claiming that civilians in Gaza are not innocent. And so this rhetoric of dehumanization, he really spoke out against it. And so this is a very rare example of a Jewish lawmaker weighing in on what could be considered alleged war crimes in Gaza. He tweeted and said the very serious ambulance incident in the south of Gaza Strip raises difficult and poignant questions. One should not automatically accept every claim in foreign media, but one cannot close their eyes. So I wanted to call that to your attention, and also to let you know, speaking of politicians, 2 British members of parliament were detained in Tel Aviv and were not allowed into the country. So they visited Israel. They were a part of an official delegation, and they flew into Ben Gurion. Israel claims that they were detained due to plans to document the activities of security forces and spread anti-Israel hatred. David Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary and active participant, said that this was unacceptable, counterproductive, and deeply concerning that 2 British members of parliament on a parliamentary delegation to Israel were detained and refused entry by the Israeli authorities. Israel also announced that they're presuming to resume aid deliveries to Gaza. This was in an Israeli news source, but they would be the ones who would be the distributors. They said even without securing hostages, that this move would be driven by operational humanitarian and legal considerations. I've not seen this in the US news. I just want you to know, but I saw this in Israeli news. They said there's a humanitarian alert mechanism that has a humanitarian timer that says essential supplies are expected to run out within a month. Political leadership's anticipated to approve the resumption of aid deliveries regardless of other developments. They said that they will pilot an initiative in Rafah that would involve direct distribution of aid to civilians by Israeli soldiers in coordination with international organizations. A primary driver behind this is the potential for violations of international law, which could expose commanders in the Israeli forces to legal scrutiny. So just for you to know, during the 43-day ceasefire, Israel facilitated the entry of about 600 trucks per day, which is more than the trucks per day that were going in prior to October 7th, 2023. Now, reportedly, Hamas has seized the majority of fuel and food for its own use. That was what certain news in Israel reported. The U.S. government under the Biden administration denied that being true. And so we'll see what happens in that regard. Again, I have not heard anything as of yet in U.S. news in this regard. We know about 200,000 Palestinians have been displaced just since the recent ceasefire ended. And there's frustration with the defense establishment over the failure of an American-Egyptian checkpoint that's being operated in the Netzarim corridor. We heard that about 20,000, again, this is according to Israeli news sources, Hamas militants crossed from the south to the north unimpeded. And so, this is a very far-right Israeli news source that I'm giving you this information from. In the West Bank, a Palestinian who's an American citizen, who's a teenager, was just killed by Israeli soldiers. 2 others were wounded. This happened yesterday, according to Palestinian officials. The Israeli military said that the 3 people who were injured and the 1 teenager, this Palestinian American who was killed, were throwing rocks towards the highway. So a Palestinian American teenager killed for throwing rocks towards the highway. In Jenin, there's been 77 days of Israeli forces and their incursion there. So I wanted to let you know that things in Jenin are still significantly escalated. Israeli soldiers opened fire on workers there. And yesterday, Israeli forces detained several displaced individuals near the eastern entrance of the Jenin camp. In Yemen and the broader Middle East, we've been talking about the U.S. strikes and whether or not they've had any efficacy there. And there's been this whole question about what's going on in Iran. And so we'll keep an eye on that in the days ahead. There's significant concern in Egypt also about the potential for mounting public unrest and the potential instability that will result if a ceasefire is not reached. And with the ongoing escalations, of Israel's involvement in Lebanon, in Syria, that this entire situation in Gaza could cause upheaval in the broader Middle East. Several powerful Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq have prepared to disarm to avert a conflict with the Trump administration, according to senior commanders and Iraqi officials. And the move followed repeated warnings issued privately by U.S. officials to the Iraqi government. An Iranian-backed militia, a drone attack killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan last year, was most likely preventable. This is what was said by a military investigation report that the Washington Post just obtained. So that's news specifically coming from the Middle East today on Monday, April 7th. Continue in your prayers and in your efforts. We'll be around on Wednesday during our weekly prayer meeting, Thursday for our live weekly briefing. I'll continue to give you updates here from the Middle East every day. So may God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.